Hi, welcome to Grand Plans, Episode 1, where we interview Jillian Dunbar, a local hospice nurse working for one of the biggest hospice companies in the Jacksonville area. Be sure to catch this episode on our YouTube channel, on Facebook at Grand Plans, and on Instagram at Grand Plans 2022.
Got it.
All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time of the day it is. My name is Susanna Barton, and I'm the founder of the Grand Plans online community. And I'm here today with an old friend and a wonderful human being, Jillian Dunbar. She is a hospice nurse working here at a local hospice company that many of us know about. And she's going to talk to us about hospice care and all of the hard work that goes into it and what we can all expect from the experience should we one day find ourselves in need of that service. So, Jillian, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I'm excited to be here.
You're here.
I'm excited too.
Well, let's start off. I was going to ask a funny babysitting question because Jillian was our babysitter way back in our first babysitter. Back when Ben was just a little baby, and we let Jillian hang out with our kids when they were but infants while we whooped it up in the Bahamas for days on end.
That's right.
But those were the days. But anyway, she took such good care of our family, and
I
we
love
were
you
always
guys.
so grateful for all that you did
Thank
for
you.
our kids. And now Jillian has moved into another area of caregiving. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got into hospice care.
Well, I got into it. I had lived out in Texas for a little while. I needed a little hiatus from Florida. And I came back. I got my CNA out in Texas. I came back and my mom was very familiar with this hospice company, and she said, why don't you apply there? And I said, oh, I don't know, hospice, that sounds so sad. I love helping people, and I don't know, let me see. So I waited on it for a little while, and I said, okay, I'll try it. So I did get the job, and I started out as a CNA, and I worked there for 2 years. And then all the nurses I worked with said how much, this was really a passion for me and that I needed to go to nursing school. Mm-hmm. So I had to leave there, unfortunately, to go to school full time. But I got my LPN and I went back as soon as I could. And I just celebrated this month 7 years back at hospice. So
Wow.
Absolutely love it.
Well, what drew you back? You said, you mentioned that your colleagues were seeing your passion for it. What was it about the job that brought you joy and brought you into the field as you did?
I think it was more just being able to be with people, in their last days, in their last hours, in their last minutes, and being able to help the families cope with that also, because death is hard and everyone processes death differently. Some people handle it well and some people don't handle it well. So and the most important, bringing comfort to the patient and making sure they experience what we call a good death is probably the most important thing.
Well, let's jump right in. What is a good death? I mean, that.
If you can describe it, I guess.
Yeah.
So we would describe a good death as, pain-free. Mm-hmm. And you really want to be emotionally and spiritually clear as well. So, there's chaplains on board and social workers and things like that. But, comfort, pain-free, you have your family surrounding you.
And is it good death? Does it matter whether it's in your home or in I guess let's start there too and talking about the different venues for making sure someone has a good death. Yeah.
So hospice is not just, an inpatient facility. Yes, there are inpatient facilities, but you can be in your own home. The majority of people want to be in their own homes when they pass. Mm-hmm. So we do everything to make that possible with medications and doctor's visits, nurse practitioner visits, things like that. We go into the nursing homes as well, long-term care, assisted living, So there's definitely different routes. You don't have to just go into a facility to pass or, to get hospice services.
So that it being in an actual hospice facility is a choice of the patient and their family. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay.
So some people, don't want to pass at home, and they don't want that memory to be there in their home, and so they will opt to go inpatient. But like I said, most people do want to pass at home.
And I know there's another, just speaking from some personal experiences, hospice can be a way to support someone in a more prolonged death situation where there's decline over a longer period of time. How do people access that kind of service, and who is that good for?
So that would be palliative care. So you're still able to seek treatment, chemo, things like that. But they can also, hospice can come in and do medication management, pain management. You have music therapy, massage therapy, all different kinds of resources, but you're not quite, at that point where you need full hospice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've been a hospice nurse for 7 years.
Yep.
Have you seen a typical, let's just get right to the chase,
Okay.
and let's not treat this subject like it's weird or that, it's inappropriate
not a bad
to
word.
talk about. Right.
Yep.
So what happens when someone is in their dying, is actively dying? Are there common themes that people
There are
should
signs
look out
and
for?
symptoms of someone in what we call the active dying process. Generally, they're unconscious. They're not really aware. They can hear you. So hearing is the last thing to go. So we
Okay.
always encourage family to talk to them, sing to them, put on their favorite music. We don't encourage a lot of being on the bed with them and, hovering over them and touching them a lot and things like that. But, they can still hear you. So there's not going to be response from them. But, you hope that there's comfort, not a lot of agitation, things like that. So generally people, towards the end, their breathing slows down. They have longer pauses in between breaths. And then generally textbook wise, they'll take one last kind of a deep breath, and then that's kind of it. I mean, that's a picture perfect death. It's just someone who just kind of stops breathing.
Is there a typical length of time that people might prepare to spend helping a loved one through this experience?
Well, that's hard to say. People have been in the active dying process for hours to days, and unfortunately we've seen some weeks, which that's hard to watch.
Yeah.
But ultimately it's not up to us, so our job is just to make them comfortable and help the families through, until that time comes.
When should families start thinking about hospice as part of their future? Is that something that we need to start getting comfortable with now as we look ahead, and then make a game plan around it, when we're thinking about living, our final years and where that factors in? Or is it more of it's an emergency,
Right.
it's time to start
Right.
thinking about this? What are the most successful situations you've seen?
Optimally, the best success is to start thinking about it now. You don't have to, planning, yes, your wishes. Tell everyone that will listen what your wishes are.
Yeah,
Have them
just
in
talk about
writing
it.
if you can, living wills, assign power of attorney, healthcare surrogates, things like that.
So get legally prepared with your documents.
Absolutely.
And
Now,
factor that in. Yeah.
that should be for anybody, any age, but yeah, especially now. And, most people are dealing with or have dealt with other family members who have passed away or in nursing homes or have dealt with hospice. But, if you haven't, there's, tons of resources out there online. But yeah, I mean, I would advise anyone, the earlier the better, because that way when things happen, especially with your family members, you can be a grieving family member and not have to run around the city trying to get things notarized and signed. And, I mean, it's hard enough losing a loved one, but if you have everything in line and in order and you know what that person wants, it makes it 10 times better experience.
Can you tell me about some of the worst case situations that you've seen where, things that you look back on and think, oh gosh, if it's me, I am never doing that. I am going to make sure that I have got my what together enough to,
Yeah, I mean, I
figure
feel
this out. Tell me about some of the more negative experiences that you've learned from.
I feel like, I've seen a lot of family dynamics, situations, things like that. So some of the biggest things I see are siblings fighting over what their parent would have wanted, or fighting over finances.
Because they haven't had the conversation ahead of time.
Right, exactly.
On the same page.
Well, I don't know what she would have wanted. We didn't talk about that. It's, and that's the hardest part, because then, somebody's going to carry guilt, and, that's the last thing you want is any, child of yours carrying guilt of what decision they made for you. So even if you have young kids, teenagers, you never know when something's going to happen. So tell anybody and everyone that will listen your wishes and have them written down if you can. Finances are a big thing. Having to run around last minute, for different things, different decisions, bank stuff and trying to get paperwork together and things like that. And, it seems to be just a lot of miscommunication within the families, that things that they wanted weren't necessarily set in stone or told, and one person thought one thing, well, the other person feels different about death, so that's not what they would want, so they don't want to do that. And so it gets confusing, it's very emotional.
I guess there's a legal way to talk about what you would like, and then there's just casual conversation about how you envision that. And I think, at least in some of the experiences I've seen and or been through, having more of that conversation with anybody and everybody on the front end way before,
absolutely,
so that it's very clear, can be a real help in this type of situation. What are some of the ideal scenarios that you've seen, and what have you taken away from those?
Yeah, you do have some picture perfect situations. I mean, the patient's comfortable, the family's on board, they understand, that their loved one is dying, and sometimes it's hard for people to grasp that concept and really understand, the absence of that person that's going to be. But, ideally, you want the patient comfortable, and you want the family to be on board with, plan of care, which is medications and things like that, and that they're okay too, and like I said, there's, chaplains and social workers that will help people through certain things. And, but I think it's more of, kind of coming to terms with, what does death mean for you individually? If you can look inward and say, how do I feel about death? And what does that mean to me? It may not be what your loved one is experiencing, but if you can at least acknowledge how you feel about death, usually it makes it a little bit easier to handle your loved one's death.
Yeah. And has your work made you think about your own?
All the time.
Yeah. I mean, is it weird? Like, is it kind of morbid? And do people are like, oh my God, here comes Jillian. She's probably going to want to talk about how she wants to go out in style. But I mean,
I've told everyone, I've told, anyone, like I told you, anyone that would listen what I want, and I also did the Honoring Choices.
What is that? Honoring Choices?
Honoring Choices of Florida is a booklet. Hospice does offer those, but you can get them online or whatever. And it's basically kind of like a non-official will of what you want done or not done, or, life-saving measures or not. And you sign it and things like that. So it can be used, but it's not as, official with a lawyer, or you don't need a lawyer or
Right.
an
So
attorney
it's
to
kind
do
of,
anything.
it's real talk
Yeah.
about your death.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And not using hard to understand
Right.
words.
Right.
It's pretty clear.
Yes.
Human
Yeah.
speak.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
talk.
Right.
That's the stuff I understand best.
That's right. All the legal jargon gets to be a much for everybody,
Well, you've mentioned a couple of things. I want to go down a couple of different paths, but you mentioned there are chaplains available. How much of it is a spiritual experience? I mean, do people come in? I mean, I've got to think everyone comes in with a different faith background and a different experience. How much of a spiritual experience is your work?
Very. People usually have some type of awareness at the end of death that either, say someone was raised Christian and then they were not practicing, but at their death, they want to make sure that they're okay going where they're going, so sometimes people rush into, oh, can we find someone, hurry to pray for me, and and then we do have different things for different faiths, so it's not just Christian-based priests, rabbis, things like that. So, but yeah, it's very spiritual, very spiritual.
And this is kind of getting into the woo part of it. But I mean, do you notice? Is there anything that happens at the end of everyone's life where it is very obviously a transition spiritually?
Yeah, so many people see family members that have already passed, and they'll start talking to them
Ahead of time, like you?
Yes, within days. Within days
of dying?
Yes, generally.
Okay.
Generally.
And is it just
their mother or their sister or even a child that's passed. It's amazing. I mean, it's actually very amazing to see that, they are already connecting with that other side.
And is that pretty across the board in your experience?
I would say 50-50.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone, sees other family members or anybody that's passed, but I would say about 50-50, yeah.
And what else are they describing, or what kinds of
the lights? A lot of lights. Yep.
Okay.
Walking towards the light, or I saw a big bright light, and then so and so was standing there or reaching for me or telling me to come with them, and it's very moving, very moving.
Has that changed your perspective, your spirituality, or any of your beliefs, having seen some of these things?
It hasn't changed them negatively. If anything, it's really helped my faith grow, and I've been on my own journey of regrowing my faith and things like that in the last 5 or 6 years. But yes, I mean, it's amazing. It's kind of, it confirms what you already believe, so it's, and not many people are saying, oh, God or Jesus or, whoever, but it's pretty amazing to watch. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing you mentioned were some of the services that Hospice provides. And one that I know you had mentioned in another venue is pets. That there's
pet
a lot of people get to the end of their life and they have a little four-legged buddy that might need a place to go live after. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, and then some other services that might fall into the same kind of category?
Right. So I thought I got ahead of you, and I thought you were talking about our pet therapy.
Yeah.
But yes, Hospice does have a pet therapy program for current patients, and so somebody will bring their dog around, see the patients, and they always love that. Yeah. But yes, there is a service that will help rehome dog, cat, even they've done birds and other type of animals and things like that. Once that person passes, they'll try and help rehome that pet or pets. And it's very successful.
I would think that's a problem for more people than we think about initially.
Well, especially people going from their home maybe to a long-term care facility. They don't have anyone in town, no family around, and they can't stay in their home any longer because it's no longer safe. So when they go into a long-term care facility, they'll help rehome their pet.
Yeah.
It's neat.
How often, Jillian, do you see people who you know, and does that make it harder on you as a hospice nurse to administer care?
Well, I was born and raised in Jacksonville, so unfortunately I've seen quite a few people that I know, not as many family members, but just people I've known in the community. It's sad, but in a way it helps the family to knowing that they know someone that's helping their loved one through that process.
And I've got to say, just as a little side story, when we were visiting one of our family members in a hospice facility near the beach, we had not seen you in a long time, and who should be there but little old you?
Yeah.
And we felt it really felt like a blessing to see you on that scene. So I know what you mean. It must feel nice to people to have some familiarity with their
it's extra comfort. And of course they can't message me and ask me how they're doing. I can't, answer that for them, but it's just an extra layer of comfort during that time, which is already difficult.
How do you do it?
That's what everybody says.
What brings you joy, and and how do you deal with the obvious sadness of it? I just think that's got to be a heavy emotional thing to lug around with you at your work, but maybe it's so great that I don't even understand. So tell me about that.
It is hard in its own way. I mean, I don't often carry patient things home with me, emotions and things like that. Some of them will really get you. Generally, the younger people, those are hard. But I think you have to think of it as you're giving a gift during people's hardest time of their life, whether it's the patient who is just tired. They're tired of chemo. They're tired of treatments. They're tired of fighting. And you're giving them that comfort, and they are thankful for it. And then you're also helping the families in one of their hardest times of their lives, losing a spouse, losing a parent, losing a child. It's hard to describe because people do ask me that a lot. It's just something that's been in my heart since I started there. And I think it's just more of bringing comfort, knowing you're helping them during the hardest time of their life.
Well, that's a calling.
Yes,
I would think.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the very definition of a calling.
Yeah. Something
that your colleagues saw in you early on.
Right.
And so it's that help that brings you the joy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you recharge? And do you ever leave at the end of the day just thinking, I can't take another bit of it? Or do you feel fulfilled enough that doesn't happen?
I have to say, I could probably count on one hand how many times I woke up and said, I just don't feel like going to work today. I mean, it genuinely has been the best experience of a job I've ever had. I don't even consider it a job. I get lost for words.
That's a wonderful way to
it.
feel about your job.
I mean,
not many people do.
Right. I absolutely love it.
Well, you are really filling many people's needs, and that's such a gift.
There are some myths.
Oh yeah, let's talk about myths.
Yeah, I'd like to do a myth fact kind of thing.
Oh, I love those myth facts.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So
tell me the first big myth.
I'll give you a couple of them.
And then you tell me the facts.
The first myth would be that people only go into hospice to die, or that you can only go in hospice if you're dying, and that's not true. So technically, by the book, hospice is a illness, I'm forgetting the word.
A condition? No.
Yeah, but you have a length of time, a prognosis.
A prognosis,
Thank you. A prognosis of 12 months or less.
Okay.
Now, I do have to put in, the parentheses there because hospice is covered by Medicare, but you have to have a prognosis of 6 months or less for Medicare. But so you don't have to come to hospice, right at the end of your life. And people who have cancer or ALS or COPD or heart issues, I mean, you can be on hospice for years. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're dying.
Yeah. And we talked about this before we before we were rolling.
Yep.
And I was mentioning a previous experience with a friend who was long time ill, and she it was a very slow prognosis.
Yeah.
But hospice was very helpful in fulfilling some of her very basic medical needs, like a comfortable bed that raised up, some diapers, food, all of that stuff, and it was free, and it was a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Yeah, most of that's covered. So, medical equipment, medications, nursing services, obviously chaplain, social work services. A lot of that is covered under hospice care, and it's Medicare, Medicaid, and most private insurances cover hospice as well.
Yeah. Okay. What about myth number two?
Okay, myth number 2 is a big one that we hear when I worked inpatient. Is something we heard a lot, and most people are scared of the word morphine. People think morphine is a street drug that we just give and then all of a sudden they die.
Right.
Couldn't be further from the truth.
Okay, so let's talk morphine.
Yes. So morphine, another thing not a lot of people know, morphine's not just good for pain, but it's good for shortness of breath.
Huh.
So morphine...
It deepens
So it will relax their lung muscles so that they can breathe better. So that's not a lot of people know that also. But people in hospice are not getting strong enough doses to kill them.
Okay.
So it is strictly for comfort, pain management, respiratory management. And no one's dying because of medicine. They're dying because of their disease process. Mm-hmm. So that's a big one for me.
Yeah.
That's a big one for me.
That's good.
Yeah. And you don't have to have a DNR to go into hospice.
Okay,
a lot of people think about that.
And so what if you just flat out don't want to be treated? Because I think about this a lot too. Like, I feel like at some point in my life, I'm just going to get older and die. And I probably, I may have something that I don't know about, but I don't care. Like, what if someone has declined any medical treatment and they just want to pass away? I mean, does it have to be a condition that gets you into hospice care?
Okay. Well, you do have to have an illness. Yes, you have to have a diagnosis of some sort of advanced or terminal illness. Yes,
okay.
For hospice, yes.
Right.
But you don't have to have a DNR to come into hospice. But the hard part is trying to talk to people about their 95-year-old mother who has been fine all of her life, and now all of a sudden she's not doing good. And you try and talk to them about the DNR, and they're like, oh, no, she's fine, So I would encourage anyone that is not really open to a DNR after, I would say, 80 years old, this sounds horrible, but to look up CPR on an elderly person. Mm-hmm. It is violent, and it is... I watched it once, and I would never want to do it. I would never want to watch it again. Mm-hmm. But that's what your loved one will go through if 911 has to be called.
And a DNR is a prerequisite to being in hospice care?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's encouraged, of course, but no, it is not required. But it's hard to see, when an 80-plus-year-old person comes in and the family's very adamant against it, and it's hard because that's what we're going to have to do if something happens to them and they go unconscious or stop breathing. We're going to have to break ribs, and that pain will be, in my opinion, worse than dying.
Yeah. And we talked about this again, I think it was on a Facebook post or something. My brother and I had not signed a DNR for my father when he was in the hospital, and I wish that we had, because it resulted in one of a situation like that.
Yeah, it's just awful to see.
But there are, as you mentioned earlier, some differences between someone's illness. Like if they're in the hospital and ill, then maybe you wouldn't have to, like a DNR isn't something you'd necessarily talk about.
You don't have to rush to do that now. With all the grand plans, folks, you don't, but think about it, and think about, if something happened to me 10 years from now, do I want someone pounding on my chest or do I just want to go naturally? You know, everyone's going to feel about it differently. I'm just saying from my experience, it's not a pretty situation, and it's not something I would want my parents, even at their age now, going through, you know, but it's hard because it's final. I mean, unless you tear it up, it's final, you know, but you can have like a living will instead of like, you know, for your age or whatever, if you wanted specific things, you know, I wouldn't mind a feeding tube, but I don't want, you know, to be on a vent or something like that. You could put that in your living will and that will be fine.
Right.
You know, you don't have to sign a DNR right now. But, you know, for people caring for their parents or older loved ones or something like that, it's definitely something to consider.
Well, I did feel like there was a gap between what the living or the medical directives that my father had very meticulously put in place. The difference between that and having a DNR and knowing as his children what he would have wanted. We kind of knew. Yeah. I mean, we had a sense of that what he would, but we'd never had those deep conversations before about what, you know, like unequivocally he would not want to be on a ventilator. Right. So
did he have that in his living will?
He did not have it in his living. It was not part of his legal package.
Wishes.
Yes.
Okay.
And it all worked out in the end. But there was a moment where there was a feeling of some void. Yeah. Or like, okay, I'm not sure. There's a lot of gray area right here.
Yeah. And
don't want gray area.
Right. And that's where it's hard when they're incapacitated to make those decisions sometimes. So that's why I say be as specific as possible, you know, and if it changes, then change it. You know, as you get older, if you're like, well, I thought 10 years ago I might want this, but now I don't, change it as soon as you can. You know, I mean, you just never know when something's going to happen. My other thing, before I want to mention it before I forget again, is we had talked about, you know, children taking care of their parents and things like that. And I learned a couple years ago that my own parents got like a long-term care insurance. And I know I've heard it's pricey, but it sounds very worth it. So that way, I know a lot of people don't want to be a financial burden on their kids and have to worry about them taking care of them and things like that. But I've heard that's, you know, if you're financially able to, I think that's a great benefit to have.
Yes. Yeah. And now that you've mentioned it, do you know anything about I know with some long-term care, and yes, I've heard that it's expensive, and it has to be well documented. You can't just say, "Oh, Jillian, hey, can you come over here and water my plants?" You know, and
no.
insurance will pay for it.
Can't do that.
No, but I also think there's a little distinction or a big distinction between care that could be for what do you call it, non-critical or anyway, it's I know that there's some pros and cons to what kind of care it'll pay for. Skilled nursing was what I was looking for. And I think skilled nursing is another distinction point. If you need skilled nursing care, that is covered by Medicaid. Right. Or Medicare, which if you need non-skilled help, like if you just needed someone to come sit with you at night and help, then that is not covered. So
there's always different levels because Medicare will always take or not want to put out as much as possible. They don't want to pay. So having that as a backup, you know, has helped. I mean, I've heard of people who have had it, and it has bridged some gaps. But it also, you know, say one of your spouse or something, you know, you're the main breadwinner, so you have to work, but your spouse doesn't have to work, so that will pay for them to take care of you, you know, essentially. So you can even have a family member do it and it will benefit them as well. So it's not, you know, we don't have to hang out with them for free. It's a lot to learn,
Jillian.
I know, it's a lot.
Gosh, how do you keep it all straight?
I don't.
I mean, does it? And you mentioned your parents, and they're good planning.
Oh my gosh!
Have you sat them down and told them some things about how it's going to go down?
I had to ask. You know, they're very private people.
They're sweet, and they're the most loving.
I know they are.
Mom is adorable.
They are the best.
I love seeing her at the Winn-Dixie, although I haven't in a while.
Yeah, she still goes up there. I don't know. I don't know. But yes, I mean, I did. I had to start asking, you know, what do you guys want? What don't you want? You know, I originally thought one thing about cremation or burial, and now it's different. So, you know, ask questions. If you're an adult child and you haven't had that discussion with your parents, be the first one to ask. If they're private and, you know, they're not going to bring it to you, ask them, you know, because everyone should have peace at death and not scrambling around or, you know, trying to figure things out, or who would want this and who would want that, and yes, no. And, you know, you should be able to just be a family member grieving.
Mm-hmm.
So the most you can have planned out, the better.
So the goal is peace.
Yes.
Peaceful
And comfort.
death, a good death.
Yes.
And to get there, it's communication.
Yep.
And planning.
Yes.
If I had to boil it all down.
That's right.
That would be my thesis.
Yeah.
Well, Jillian, you are a superstar.
Oh, thank you.
I am so proud of what you do every day. And
thank you very much.
I think you're an amazing person, an angel on earth for sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So thank you for sharing your stories and your advice, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us for the first edition of Grand Plans. We are so fortunate to have had hospice nurse Jillian Dunbar with us today, sharing some really amazing experiences. So look out for the interview on our YouTube page, on Facebook at Grand Plans, and on Instagram at Grand Plans 2022. And don't forget to tune in the next time when we have a local professional who's specialized in geriatric care issues of many different flavors. We have Heather Weidel, and she is the president of Care Management Associates in Ponte Vedra Beach. So thank you, and look forward to being with you next time.